I was halfway through reviewing the monthly procurement reports when my phone buzzed with a message from Human Resources. Please come to conference room B at 2 p.m. No explanation. No subject line. Just a short message. Normally that wouldn't have worried me. After 9 years at the company, I had attended hundreds of meetings. Most of them were routine. Budget discussions, project reviews, hiring plans, compliance audits. My work life was predictable and I liked it that way. I was a senior operations coordinator at a logistics company that supplied medical equipment to hospitals across the country. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. Every shipment had deadlines. Every mistake could affect patients waiting for treatment. I took pride in my job. My colleagues often joked that if the company suddenly lost all its documentation, I could rebuild it from memory. They weren't completely wrong. I knew every major client, every supplier contract, and every reporting procedure. When problems appeared, people came to me because they trusted me to find solutions. At least that's what I believed. At 2 p.m. sharp, I entered conference room B. The first thing I noticed was the silence. My department manager, David, was sitting at the far end of the table. Beside him was an HR representative named Monica. A third chair had been left empty for me. David didn't smile. That immediately felt wrong. For years we had worked well together. Even during difficult projects, he always greeted me warmly. Please sit down, Emma, Monica said. I sat. My stomach tightened. David slid a folder across the table. Can you explain these purchase authorizations? I opened the folder. Inside were copies of procurement approvals totaling nearly $80,000. My signature appeared on every page. I stared at them. What is this? I asked. These orders were approved under your credentials, David said. They're fake. The words left my mouth instantly. Because they were. I had never seen those documents before. The supplier names looked familiar, but the order numbers were wrong. Several formatting details were inconsistent with our internal templates. I looked up. Someone altered these. Neither of them responded. Monica folded her hands. Our audit team traced the approvals to your employee account. That's impossible. The system logs show your credentials were used. I felt my pulse quicken. For the first time in years, I didn't know what to say. The documents were fraudulent. I knew that. But how could I prove it? Over the next hour, I answered question after question. Had I shared my password? No. Had I approved emergency purchases outside normal procedures? No. Had I communicated with the suppliers listed in the report? No. Every answer was truthful. Yet every piece of evidence seemed to point toward me. When the meeting ended, I was placed on temporary administrative leave pending an investigation. I walked back to my desk feeling as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. The office looked exactly the same. Employees worked at their computers. Phones rang. Printers hummed. But everything felt different. People had already noticed something was wrong. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Several coworkers avoided eye contact. Others looked at me with obvious curiosity. The hardest part wasn't the accusation. It was the uncertainty. 9 years of good work suddenly meant nothing. By the end of the day, I packed a small box with personal belongings. A coffee mug, 2 notebooks, a framed photo from a company volunteer event. As I was leaving, one of my closest coworkers approached me. Her name was Rachel. We had worked together for almost 4 years. Emma, what happened? She asked softly. I forced a smile. They think I approved fraudulent purchases. Her eyes widened. That's ridiculous. I know. She looked genuinely shocked. I'll tell them they're making a mistake. I thanked her. At the time, I believed she was being sincere. I had no reason not to. Rachel and I had spent countless hours working together. We covered shifts for each other. We shared project responsibilities. We celebrated promotions together. If someone had told me that day that Rachel would eventually become the central figure in everything that happened, I would have laughed. Instead, I left the building convinced that we were still friends. The following week became one of the worst periods of my life. The company investigation expanded. More questionable transactions appeared. Each one seemed connected to my employee credentials. The total losses exceeded $100,000. I hired a lawyer. Not because I planned to sue anyone. I simply needed someone to help me understand what was happening. The situation made no sense. My performance reviews had always been excellent. My access permissions were strictly controlled. I followed procedures more carefully than almost anyone else in the department. Yet somehow I had become the primary suspect. 2 weeks later, the company reached its conclusion. I was called back to headquarters. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. David couldn't even look directly at me. Monica read from a prepared statement. Based on the evidence available, the company has determined that serious violations of procurement policy occurred under your authorization. My throat felt dry. I already knew what was coming. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. 9 years. Gone in a single sentence. I listened quietly while they explained severance terms and appeal procedures. The words blurred together. When the meeting ended, I stood up. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I looked at David. Do you really believe I did this? His silence answered the question. I nodded slowly. Then there's nothing else to discuss. I left the building carrying the same small box I had packed weeks earlier. Outside, rain had started falling. Employees moved quickly toward the parking lot. Most didn't notice me. Few did. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked suspicious. I understood why. From their perspective, the evidence seemed clear. The company had investigated. The company had made its decision. The company had fired me. Case closed. But as I sat alone in my car, staring at the headquarters building where I had spent nearly a decade of my life, one thought refused to leave my mind. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone inside that office had lied. Someone had carefully arranged every piece of evidence. And for reasons I couldn't yet understand, they had chosen me as the person to destroy. The first month after my dismissal felt unreal. Every morning I still woke up at 6:15, exactly as I had for years. My body followed the same routine even though I no longer had an office to go to. I would make coffee, open my laptop, and instinctively reach for work emails that no longer existed. Then reality would hit me again. I wasn't employed. I wasn't part of the company anymore. And according to official records, I was the employee responsible for a major fraud scheme. The damage extended far beyond losing my salary. Former colleagues stopped contacting me. Industry connections became distant. Recruiters who had seemed interested suddenly disappeared after background checks. The professional reputation I had spent nearly a decade building was collapsing. What hurt most was the betrayal. Not because the company fired me. Organizations often choose the easiest explanation when faced with a problem. What hurt was knowing that someone I had worked beside had allowed it to happen. Someone knew the truth. Someone watched me take the blame. And they stayed silent. 3 weeks after my dismissal, my lawyer called. Emma, I need you to come by my office. His voice sounded different. More focused. Less cautious. When I arrived, several documents were spread across the conference table. He pointed at one of them. Tell me about Rachel. I frowned. What about her? Just answer the question. I sat down. She's a coworker. Or was. We worked together for years. Did she have access to your systems? Sometimes. Your workstation? Occasionally. He nodded slowly. Then he slid a printed report toward me. Look at the timestamps. I examined the page. It contained login records from the company's internal systems. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my eyes stopped on a specific date. A Saturday. The office had been almost empty that day. I remembered it clearly because I had been attending my nephew's birthday party. I had photos, videos, dozens of witnesses. Yet according to the system logs, my employee account had been active for nearly 4 hours. I looked up. How is that possible? That's exactly the question. My lawyer tapped another section of the report. The company's investigation focused on your credentials. So? They didn't focus on physical access. I stared at him. Then slowly the realization began forming. Someone had used my account. But they hadn't necessarily been me. Over the following weeks, my lawyer hired a digital forensic specialist. The deeper they looked, the stranger the situation became. The fraudulent approvals had all been created from my credentials. However, several had originated from workstations located in different sections of the office. workstations I rarely used. Some of the timestamps overlapped with meetings where multiple employees had seen me elsewhere. The evidence against me suddenly looked less certain. Then another discovery changed everything. One afternoon my lawyer called again. This time his excitement was impossible to hide. We found motive. I drove to his office immediately. When I arrived, he handed me a thick folder. Inside were internal financial records obtained during legal proceedings. Rachel's name appeared repeatedly. I felt confused. Then I saw the numbers. Credit card debt, personal loans, late payments, collection notices. My stomach dropped. Rachel had been in serious financial trouble, far worse than anyone at work knew. According to the documents, she owed more money than her annual salary. What does this have to do with me? I asked. My lawyer opened another file. A supplier account, one connected to several fraudulent purchases. The company ownership information had recently changed. A new shareholder had been added, Rachel's brother. I stared at the page, then read it again. And again. No, that couldn't be right. Could it? For years Rachel had listened to my concerns. She knew my schedule, my responsibilities, my system access. She knew exactly how procurement approvals worked. She knew exactly which controls existed and which weaknesses could be exploited. Suddenly dozens of forgotten moments returned to me. Questions she had asked. Passwords she had watched me enter. Time she volunteered to cover my desk. Situations that had seemed completely innocent. At the time, now they looked different. Very different. The investigation continued. More records were subpoenaed. More evidence surfaced. Then the breakthrough finally arrived. It came from a security camera. A camera nobody had reviewed during the company's original investigation. The footage showed Rachel entering a restricted office area on one of the dates connected to fraudulent transactions. Normally that wouldn't have mattered. Employees moved around the building all the time. But there was one problem. She had used my access badge. The camera clearly showed it. The image wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Good enough to identify her. Good enough to establish unauthorized access. Good enough to raise serious questions. For the first time since my dismissal, I felt hope. Real hope. A few days later, my lawyer filed a formal demand for the company to reopen its investigation. Initially they resisted. Then they reviewed the new evidence. The response was immediate. Within 48 hours, an external audit firm was brought in. Within a week, Rachel was placed on administrative leave. Within 2 weeks, the entire case had exploded. Former coworkers started contacting me again. Not because they suddenly supported me, because they were hearing rumors. Serious rumors. One evening my phone rang. The caller ID showed David. For several seconds I simply stared at the screen. Then I answered. Hello. Silence. Then a sigh. Emma. I recognized the guilt in his voice immediately. David. We need to talk. I looked out the window of my apartment. Rain was falling across the city, just like the day I had been fired. What about? Another pause. The investigation. I waited. Finally he said the words I had been waiting months to hear. We think we made a mistake. A mistake. Such a small phrase. Yet it represented the destruction of nearly everything I had built. My career. My reputation. My trust. My friendships. All reduced to 2 words. A mistake. I closed my eyes, because deep down I already knew something important. This wasn't over. Not even close. The company had only begun uncovering what Rachel had actually done. And when the full truth emerged, nobody would be able to ignore it anymore. 3 days after David's phone call, I returned to company headquarters for the first time since my dismissal. Walking through those doors felt strange. For months I had imagined this moment. Sometimes I pictured myself angry, sometimes triumphant. Instead I felt exhausted. The conference room looked exactly as I remembered. The same table, the same chairs, the same view of the city through the large windows. Only this time the atmosphere was completely different. David was there. Monica from HR was there. 2 representatives from the external audit firm sat near the end of the table. And Rachel was there. The moment our eyes met, I noticed something had changed. She looked nervous. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed unable to maintain her usual confidence. The lead auditor opened a folder. "Thank you all for attending." Nobody responded. The room remained silent. He continued. "Over the last several weeks, our team has reviewed financial records, system access logs, security footage, email correspondence, supplier relationships, and employee statements." Rachel shifted in her chair. The auditor noticed. "So far, we have identified multiple irregularities that were not included in the original internal investigation." He projected several documents onto a screen. The first showed login records. The second showed badge access logs. The third displayed communication records between Rachel and the supplier connected to the fraudulent transactions. I watched Rachel's face grow paler with every slide. Then came the security footage. The room became completely silent. The video clearly showed Rachel entering a restricted office area using my access badge. The timestamp matched one of the fraudulent purchase approvals. Nobody needed an explanation. The evidence spoke for itself. David looked shocked. Monica looked horrified. I felt neither. I simply watched. The auditor paused the video. "Rachel, can you explain this?" For several seconds she said nothing. Then she took a deep breath. "I borrowed Emma's badge." The answer sounded weak even to her. "Without authorization?" the auditor asked. She nodded. "Why?" No answer. The auditor moved to the next slide. Several emails appeared on the screen. Messages between Rachel and her brother. Messages discussing supplier contracts. Messages discussing payments. Messages discussing commission percentages. The room seemed to shrink around us. Every person present understood exactly what they were looking at. The fraud scheme had not been random. It had been planned, carefully planned, and Rachel had been at the center of it. "What about the allegations against Emma?" one auditor asked. Rachel looked down. Still no answer. The silence stretched longer and longer. Then finally she spoke. At first her voice was barely audible. "I didn't think it would go this far." Nobody interrupted. "I only needed a little time." She swallowed hard. "My debts were getting worse." The words came faster now. "I thought I could move the money through the supplier account and replace it before anyone noticed." David stared at her. Rachel continued. "But then the audit started." Her hands were trembling. I panicked. The room remained silent. "And then?" the auditor asked. Tears appeared in her eyes. "I made it look like Emma approved everything." Hearing those words out loud felt surreal. For months I had known someone framed me. Now the person responsible was admitting it herself. Rachel wiped her eyes. I copied her approval patterns. She looked at me briefly before looking away. I used information from projects we worked on together. Each confession felt heavier than the last. I knew people trusted the system logs. Another pause. I knew they would believe it was her. No one spoke. Even the auditor seemed stunned by how direct the admission had become. Then came the part that hurt most. Not because it affected my career. Because it affected our friendship. Rachel lowered her head. I knew Emma wouldn't suspect me. The room became completely still. For years I had trusted her. I had defended her. Supported her. Shared professional opportunities with her. And she had used that trust as a weapon. The meeting continued for nearly 3 hours. By the end, the facts were undeniable. Rachel had created false purchase requests. She had directed company funds toward a supplier partially controlled by her brother. She had accessed internal systems using my credentials. She had intentionally manipulated evidence to shift responsibility onto me. And after my dismissal, she had remained silent while my reputation was destroyed. The company immediately terminated her employment. Further legal action was recommended. As the meeting ended, Rachel stood up slowly. For a moment it seemed she wanted to say something to me. Maybe an apology. Maybe an explanation. I honestly don't know. But in the end she said nothing. She simply walked out of the room. And just like that she was gone. Afterward only a few people remained. David approached me first. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. Ashamed. "Emma." I waited. "I should have listened to you." His voice was sincere. "I should have investigated properly." I appreciated the honesty, but honesty arriving months late has a different weight. I trusted the evidence, he said. You trusted the easiest explanation, I replied quietly. He lowered his eyes, as he knew I was right. The company had never truly investigated me. They had investigated the version of events that seemed most convenient. And that choice had nearly destroyed my career. The following week, the audit firm's final report was completed. Its conclusions were clear. I had not participated in the fraud. I had not authorized the transactions. I had not violated company policy. Every accusation that led to my dismissal was formally withdrawn. For the first time in months, my name was officially cleared. Yet as I sat in my apartment reading the report, I realized something surprising. Relief was only part of what I felt, because clearing my name was one thing. Repairing the damage was another. The company had taken my job. The company had damaged my reputation. The company had allowed false accusations to spread throughout the industry. And now they needed to decide what they were going to do about it. A few days later, another email arrived. This one came directly from the CEO. The subject line contained only 6 words. Request for meeting regarding reinstatement. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened the message. And what I read next changed everything. The email from the CEO was short, professional, carefully written. But one sentence immediately stood out. We would like to discuss your return to the company and appropriate corrective measures regarding the circumstances of your termination. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. For months I had imagined hearing those words. At one point I wanted revenge. Later I wanted justice. Now I simply wanted the truth to be acknowledged. A week later I returned to headquarters once again. This time I wasn't there for an investigation. I wasn't there to defend myself. I wasn't there as a suspect. I was there because the company had finally admitted it had wronged me. The meeting took place in the executive conference room. When I entered, the CEO was already waiting. Several senior executives were present. The head of human resources was there. David was there as well. Everyone stood when I entered. That alone told me how much the situation had changed. The CEO motioned toward a chair. Thank you for coming, Emma. I sat down. Nobody spoke for a moment. Finally, the CEO broke the silence. Before we discuss anything else, I want to apologize. The room remained quiet. His voice was steady. The company failed you. Not the investigation. Not the process. Not a misunderstanding. The company. For the first time since all of this began, someone in leadership was accepting responsibility. We dismissed you without conducting a complete investigation. He continued. We failed to examine critical evidence. We damaged your professional reputation. And we allowed an innocent employee to suffer the consequences of another person's actions. I listened carefully, not because I wanted an apology, because I wanted accountability. The CEO continued speaking for several minutes. No excuses. No attempts to minimize what had happened. No corporate language designed to avoid responsibility. Just the truth. When he finished, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal reinstatement proposal. My previous position would be restored immediately. My employment record would be fully corrected. Every internal disciplinary notation would be removed. The company would issue an official statement clearing my name. Letters would be sent to industry partners, explaining the findings of the independent investigation. The company would also cover all legal expenses I had incurred while proving my innocence. I turned another page, then stopped. The final section addressed compensation. Because of the wrongful termination, reputational damage, emotional distress, and lost professional opportunities, the company had approved a substantial financial settlement. The amount was more money than I had ever expected. For several seconds I simply stared at the page. Not because of the number. Because it represented something larger. The company was finally acknowledging the consequences of its actions. No amount of money could erase what had happened. But refusing to recognize the damage would have been even worse. The CEO folded his hands. We hope you'll return. I looked around the room. Every person present seemed to be waiting for my answer. Months earlier I would have accepted immediately. Now it wasn't so simple. I had learned difficult lessons. Trust could be broken. Reputations could be destroyed. And good employees could become convenient scapegoats when organizations stopped asking hard questions. I took a deep breath. Then I asked the most important question. What changes have been made? The executives exchanged glances. For the next hour they explained everything. New audit procedures. Stronger access controls. Independent review requirements before employee terminations. Anonymous reporting channels. Management accountability measures. Enhanced internal investigations. As they spoke, I realized something. The company wasn't merely trying to bring me back. It was trying to prevent this from happening again. When the meeting finally ended, the CEO looked at me. So, I thought about the years I had spent there. The projects. The colleagues. The long nights solving problems. The employees who had supported me. The work that had genuinely mattered. Then I thought about the people who had fought to uncover the truth. My lawyer. The forensic specialists. The auditors. Even some coworkers who eventually came forward with information. Slowly I smiled. I'll come back. Relief spread across several faces immediately. But I wasn't finished. On one condition. The CEO nodded. What condition? I closed the folder. I don't want my old position. The room became silent. What position do you want? He asked. I want a role where I can help fix the systems that failed. A few executives exchanged surprised looks. I continued. I know exactly where the weaknesses are. I know how easily assumptions replaced facts. And I know what happens when people stop asking questions. The CEO smiled slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 weeks later, I returned to the company as Director of Operational Compliance and Process Integrity. It was a newly created role. My responsibility was to improve oversight, investigations, risk management, and employee protections. For the first time in my career, I had the authority to implement many of the improvements I had recommended for years. Returning to the office felt strange at first. Employees watched me walk through the hallways. Some smiled. Some looked embarrassed. Others approached me directly. Many offered apologies. Many offered support. A few admitted they had believed the accusations. I appreciated their honesty. Trust takes time to rebuild. I understood that. On my first day back, David stopped by my office. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Then he spoke. I don't expect forgiveness. I considered that. You made a mistake. His expression tightened. But you also admitted it. He nodded. And you helped correct it. For the first time in months he smiled. A genuine smile. So we're okay? I returned the smile. We're working on it. The following months became some of the most productive of my career. The company improved. Processes became stronger. Employees felt safer raising concerns. Investigations became more thorough. Managers became more accountable. Most importantly, people learned a lesson they would not soon forget. Evidence matters. But assumptions can be dangerous. One afternoon, nearly a year after my return, I was walking through the operations department when I noticed several newer employees gathered around a conference table. They were discussing a difficult project. One of them looked up. Emma, do you have a minute? I smiled. Of course. As I joined the discussion, I realized something. For months after my dismissal, I thought the story was about losing my job. Then I thought it was about proving my innocence. But standing there with my colleagues, helping solve another workplace problem, I finally understood what the story had really been about. It was about integrity. About refusing to accept a lie simply because it was convenient. About continuing to fight for the truth even when almost nobody believed you. Rachel had taken my position. She had damaged my reputation. She had tried to make me carry the consequences of her actions. For a while she succeeded. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. Eventually the facts spoke louder than the accusations. My name was cleared. I returned to the work I loved. The company publicly acknowledged its mistake. I received compensation for the damage that had been done. And most importantly, I regained something far more valuable than any job title. I regained my reputation. Looking back now, I don't remember the day I was fired as the end of my career. I remember it as the beginning of a chapter that taught me exactly who I was. And when I walk into the office each morning, Surrounded by colleagues who know the full story, I feel something I once thought I had lost forever. Trust. This time earned the hard way.